The Terran Death World, or as the natives called it, Earth. It was a planet like no other, where every breath could be your last. The land was crawling with dangers unseen by the untrained eyes. For centuries, the Terrans secluded themselves, honing their skills and mastering the environment in ways no other race could ever imagine, or even start to understand. Earth was the ultimate training ground, where Terrans were not just survivors, but lethal predators, and for anyone foolish enough to invade, it was not a prize. It was a death trap. General Vanacore stood confidently before the holographic display, scanning the initial data flickering in the air. The Crotan Empire, a major force in the cosmos, has been expanding their territory across numerous worlds, bringing the unfortunate planets under their ruthless rule. To Vanacore, this was just another day, and Terra was simply another target. The Crotans were intimidating, no doubt about it. They were tall, with bodies covered in natural armor that looked like dark, leathery skin studded with bony spikes. Their red eyes glowed from their insect-like heads, and a hard ridge ran from their foreheads down to their sharp, twitching mandibles, which always seemed hungry. Their limbs were long and ended in clawed fingers, making them look like they were always ready for a fight. With their hunched postures and spiked exoskeletons, the Crotans seemed more like monsters than anything else. Vanacore glanced at the hologram of Earth, curling his lip as his jagged teeth peeked out from his mandibles. The initial scans of the planet seemed dull. Terra was full of vegetation, vast jungles and forests, covering most of the planet. Animals roamed freely, and while there were signs of intelligent life, there were no apparent signs of advanced technology nor weaponry. Vanacore was disgusted. To him, this was just a backwater planet, still relying on its ecosystem instead of advanced technology. He arrogantly started addressing his officers.
Primitive, overgrown with plants, crawling with life, no technology to speak of. This will be an easy victory.
At the other end of the command table, Lieutenant Sarlin stared in concern at the biosigns coming from the scans. Her antennae twitched with unease. She had served in the Crotan military long enough to know that looks could be deceiving. The reading showed extreme biological activity, higher than any other planet they had encountered. It seemed unnatural.
General,
Sarlin began in a measured tone.
The biosigns are unusual. We should gather more data before.
Vanacore quickly interrupts with a dismissive wave.
Enough, he sneered at her. We've conquered far greater threats than this, Terra. We don't need more data to crush a planet full of trees and animals.
Sarlin was silenced, forced to hold in her unease. She had witnessed too many campaigns where overconfidence led to defeat, but she couldn't argue with Vanacore. His mind was already made up. The Crotan Empire was on the move, and Earth was their target. Vanacore stood tall and addressed his officers.
Prepare the Armada. We will launch a full-scale invasion within days. However, we'll send a recon team to scout the surface first, find out where their capital is, and how much resistance we can expect. After that, we'll strike swiftly and decisively.
The officers scrambled to carry out the order. Vanacore's eyes returned to the hologram of Earth. He looked at it coldly and determined. This was to be another achievement, another medal handed to him from the Emperor. He could already see Terra's forests ablaze under the might of his army and technology, the natives bowing and begging for mercy. In his mind, victory was already his. The next day, Captain Zarek Tallis was summoned before General Vanacore, aboard the Crotan lead ship. Zarek was one of the most reliable and experienced officers under Vanacore's command. He led countless recon missions during his time, but he couldn't help feeling uneasy. This time it felt different. There was something about what Sarlin said that left him bothered, but it wasn't his place to question commands. Vanacore's eyes stared deep into his soul as he spoke.
Captain Zarek, you and your team will be the first to set foot on this planet. Your mission is simple. Locate the capital of this world, assess the defenses, and report back. I expect this to be a routine operation. I want detailed reconnaissance. Leave nothing to chance. Zarek nodded. Understood, General. We'll gather the intel you need. The general pointed towards the large viewpoint overlooking the fleet. 1,000 ships with 100,000 soldiers aboard floated in formation. Their sleek silver bodies reflected the light of the distant stars. Terra is a primordial world, Captain. Our scans show that the natives rely more on biology than technology, which means they will be easily crushed. But make no mistake, I want this planet intact. Its resources could prove valuable to the Empire. Zarek saluted. I'll make sure of it, sir. Vanakor gave him a dismissive wave of his hand, sending him off. As Zarek left, he couldn't shake the sense of unease and worry. He was taught to never underestimate an enemy, and Terra was just setting off alarm bells in his mind. It was strange how life thrived on the planet, unchecked by the hands of the natives. The recon team was already preparing in the hangar. 10 of the Crotan's best scouts, armed with advanced weaponry and sleek combat armor. They boarded their vessel, ready for whatever this planet was going to throw their way. No barbaric world like this could ever pose a real threat. Ready for launch, Zarek said into the comm. The ship's engines roared as they departed the lead ship, heading towards the Terran surface. The thick green spread out beneath them as they descended into the atmosphere. Zarek activated the autopilot, which led them on the outskirts of the area with the highest concentration of life signals. What they assumed must be the Terran capital. Looks like we're landing in a jungle, one of the soldiers commented. Zarek focused his eyes on the land as the ship slid through the clouds and the dense jungle came into view. Stay sharp. This place is unrefined and must be filled with wildlife. The recon ship landed softly in a clearing they found. The jungle was dead quiet, not even the sound of a rustling tree. The door slid open, and Zarek and his team stepped onto the Terran soil for the first time. The mission had begun. There were no signs of the natives. All the team could see was jungle, no buildings, no structures, just endless jungle. Zarek tapped his communicator as they advanced towards the life signals. This is Captain Zarek. We've touched down. Commencing operation. Silence. Zarek looked concerned as he tapped the communicator again. Nothing. No static, no interference. Just silence. He quickly tried out his private's comms, but still nothing. Comms are down, Zarek muttered to his team. Must be some kind of interference from the environment. One of the soldiers, Sergeant Orlek, raised one of his antennae. No surprise. The tech on this planet seems almost non-existent. Zarek ignored Orlek. The dead silence was eating at him, but he couldn't let it show. Spread out into formation. We're continuing on foot. The jungle was so thick that just walking was a chore. The team moved carefully, scanning their surroundings for anything that moves. The Crotans relied heavily on their armored bodies. They believed it could protect them from whatever threats they'd encounter. I don't see how intelligent life could survive here, said Private Drell, kicking a large vine out of his way. It's like the whole place is designed to choke itself. Zarek led the pack moving forward, checking the scanner on his arm console. We're not here to sightsee. Focus on locating the capital, and let's get out of here. But as they moved deeper into the jungle, they could feel a slight shift in the atmosphere. The trees seemed larger and their branches curled in ways that seemed unnatural. The dense vegetation started to feel more like a trap. A sudden rustle caught Zarek's attention. Without any warning, massive vines dropped from above. Thick and covered in sharp thorns, the vines shone in the dim light. One of the vines shot down towards Private Drell. Before he could even react, it wrapped around his legs and yanked him off the ground. Drell screamed as the thorns tore through his armor like a saw, shredding it as if it were simple fabric. His blue blood sprayed into the air, covering his comrades as the vine dragged him up into the trees. The rest of the team froze, staring in horror as Drell's screams echoed through the jungle, then abruptly cut off. By the stars. Sergeant Orlick trembled. Zarek's heart raced in his chest, the sound of his own heartbeat drowning his thoughts. Move, move, move! He barked at his soldiers. The team sprinted after their leader, blasters raised, ready for action. They scanned their surroundings, but the jungle seemed to close in on them.
the leaves watching them like a predator stalking its prey. The team pressed forward, cutting through the bushes, but the jungle only got more hostile. Vines sprang across the air. The team desperately dodged and weaved through. Barbs shot out from the thorny bushes, piercing their armors as they ran. Strange, pulsating plants puffed clouds of spores in their face, blurring their vision. "Captain!" Another soldier screamed as a massive luminescent snake dropped from a tree. Its shiny neon scales reflected the light from their visors. The snake struck with terrifying speed, wrapping itself around Private Coral in a second, squeezing the life out of him. Coral struggled helplessly, clawing at the thick, scaly body. His armor cracked under the pressure. The rest could hear his exoskeleton cracking to bits. The serpent tossed the lifeless body aside, turning its gaze onto the next target. "How can anyone survive here?" shouted Corporal Rez, firing his blaster at the creature. The beams merely glanced off the snake's scales, barely slowing it down. Zarek quickly fired into the snake's head, finally killing it. But it was little too late. 2 of his men were already dead. The jungle grew darker by the second. "Stay calm!" Zarek shouted, his voice strained. "We push forward!" The survivors kept moving, their fear choking them from the inside. The jungle felt alive. It was hunting them. Every step they took was met with another horror. Carnivorous plants snapped at their feet. Toxic spores filled the air. Stalker beasts attacked them from the shadows. Another soldier let out a scream as a predator plant that lunged from underneath and mawed on him with sharp teeth. It latched onto him, pulling him into the earth, eating him alive. His screams felt never-ending as his body was slowly torn apart. Zarek's mind raced as they ran. This was a nightmare. The absolute worst-case scenario, getting killed before even encountering a single native. This was supposed to be a simple recon mission, but here he was, running for his life, watching his soldiers die brutally one by one. This environment defied all logic. How could anything live here? How could the natives have survived on a planet where every plant and animal seemed designed to kill? As more of his team was picked off, Zarek became painfully aware of one truth. Terra was not what they had thought. This was no primitive backwater. It was something way worse. Zarek was now the only one left. He sprinted through the jungle, his breath heavy and ragged. His prized armor was in pieces, his blaster gone. A massive panther relentlessly pursued him, its bright yellow eyes fixated on its prey. He stumbled through the bushes, his leg caught up on a root. He barely got himself up as the beast jumped at him. Desperate to escape, Zarek ran towards a nearby tree and began to climb, his claws digging into the bark as he scaled the huge trunk. His face was overcome with horror as he realized that the branches were wrapping around him. The panther circled below as Zarek struggled to get higher, barely managing to lift himself onto the thick branch. Zarek froze up on that tree, hanging on for dear life as he looked below. His team is long gone, leaving him to his inevitable death. This is a death world, he thought to himself. The planet was a death trap, and this wasn't even the worst of what it had to offer. The branch Zarek held on kept on creaking, as if it would break any second. He scrambled higher, his sight shifting from the tree to the creature lurking below. As he reached for the branch above, he froze. On one of the higher branches, he saw a figure standing there effortlessly. At first, Zarek thought it might be another predator, but as the figure stepped into the light, he realized it was a person, a man. He was casually leaning against the tree, looking down on him with an amused expression, as if the chaos surrounding them was completely normal. His eyes were sharp, analyzing, but showed no fear. He was completely at ease, even with all the danger surrounding them. Before Zarek could speak, the man extended a hand toward him. "Need a hand?" he asked, his tone light and unbothered. Zarek's translator immediately translated what the stranger was saying. He hesitated. He didn't know who or what that man was. A trick? A trap? The panther below roared, prompting Zarek to throw caution to the wind and grab the hope that was dangling in front of him. Without even a grunt, the man pulled him up on the next branch, like he weighed nothing. Zarek, who trained on multiple worlds, was stunned by his strength. He was by no means light. Yet that man lifted him easily as if helping a child. Before Zarek could even catch his breath, the stranger swung him over his shoulder and began running, leaping through the trees. The world blurred by as they moved, jumping from branch to branch with amazing speed and agility. Zarek held on in daze, overwhelmed by how fast they were moving, the wild beast left behind, frustrated. Panting, Zarek finally managed to speak. What are you?" The man smirked, glancing over his shoulder. "A local. You almost became dinner. You're lucky I found you." His tone was casual, as if he just helped Zarek out from a minor inconvenience. Zarek blinked as he struggled to wrap his mind around what was going on. His mission, his men, everything was falling apart. "Dinner? What was that thing?" "Just one of the locals, too," he said with a grin. "Don't worry about it. We've got bigger things to deal with than jungle cats." They finally landed on a thick branch, letting Zarek off the muscular shoulders that carried him to safety. Zarek stumbled, leaning against the trunk, his legs shaking from his near-death experience. He tried to regain his composure, his mind racing. Who is this man? How could he move like that? He had to play it carefully. He didn't know what these natives knew about his people or their invasion plans. "I'm an explorer," Zarek said cautiously. "I came here by accident. My ship crash-landed." The man raised an eyebrow, unimpressed with his story, but decided not to press him on it. Instead, he gave him a nod, humoring him. "An explorer, huh? Well, welcome to Earth. It's a hell of a place to get lost." "Hell?" Zarek muttered to himself as he looked around trying to make sense of everything. This jungle. It's like it's alive. How do you survive here?" The man laughed, sounding both amused and knowing. "Oh, we don't just survive here. We coexist with it." Zarek stared at him, not sure he had heard correctly. "You coexist? What do you mean?" The man jumped down from the branch, stretching his arms and gesturing to the jungle around them. "The plants, the animals, they're part of our world. We've had centuries to adapt to them. Everything you've seen, the trees, the beasts, the predators, they are how we train ourselves." Zarek couldn't believe the words coming out of the man's mouth. How could these brute natives use such an extreme environment for training? It defied everything he knew about planetary ecosystems. He had assumed that Terra was an untamed wilderness, but now he realized that it was something far more terrifying. This jungle wasn't just a dangerous environment. It was a place for training even more dangerous beings. "How?" Zarek asked, his voice low. "How do you use all of this?" The man, Sergeant Ryan Carter, who had yet to introduce himself, looked at Zarek with pity and amusement. "We've had a lot of practice. Humans aren't exactly the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, you know. So we had to get creative. The plants, the animals, they work in our favor. It's how we live here. It's how we've survived." Zarek fell into silence, processing what he was told. The Crotans had severely underestimated this planet. They thought it was a primitive planet. Never in their wildest dreams would they think that it was something far more dangerous. If these humans could survive and flourish in such an environment, then they were by no means a weak species. They were predators. "Welcome to Earth," Ryan said with a smirk, as they began walking deeper into the jungle. "It's not exactly what you expected, is it?" Zarek cautiously followed the man, observing his surroundings. The trees shifted and swayed as if they acknowledged Ryan's presence. The vines shifted out of their path, and the occasional animal passed by, but nothing approached them. Zarek tried to keep up, but his body was still exhausted from the earlier chase. "You okay, explorer?" Ryan asked. "You're looking a little rough." "I'm fine," Zarek replied. Though his legs felt like they were about to give out, he needed to play his part carefully. The longer he believed his story, the more time he had to figure out what to do next. "So, what's your plan?" Ryan asked as they walked. "Plan?" Zarek replied, caught off guard. "You know, now that you're here," he said with a grin. "You planning to explore the rest of our lovely death world? Or were you thinking about finding your way back to that ship of yours?" Zarek hesitated. He didn't know how to respond. He had no idea where his ship was at this point, and even if he did, getting back there in one piece seemed a little far-fetched. He had to keep playing along until he could find a way to call for help.
Maybe explore a little more, he said cautiously. I wasn't expecting to find all this.
Ryan chuckled. Yeah, Earth has a way of surprising people, but don't worry, I'll show you around. You'll get to see how we live. Maybe you'll even learn something. As they got deeper into the jungle, Zarek's red eyes widened as he saw what was ahead. They arrived at a massive wall of trees, their branches intertwined, forming a huge barrier. But as they approached, the trees parted, revealing the hidden city buried deep within the jungle. The sight took Zarek's breath away. It was magnificent, unlike anything he'd seen before. Giant trees formed the foundations for the structures. The trunks hollowed, creating homes and buildings. Waterfalls rained down from cliffs, feeding rivers that ran through the city. Walkways of vines connecting treetops and animals moving freely, as if they were a normal part of the community. Zarek stared in admiration, unable to process the beauty and complexity of the city. This wasn't the work of a primitive species. This was something far more advanced, something far more dangerous. Ryan glanced at him, his smirk returning. Welcome to the city. It's not much, but we like it. Come on, I'll show you around. The city boomed with life, a marvelous showcase of human control over nature. This level of mastery over the environment was impossible for Zarek to understand. Zarek was exhausted and thirsty. His muscles ached from the chase, and the humidity of the jungle was too heavy for him. You look like you could use a break, Ryan said, looking back at him with that ever-present smirk. He pointed to a nearby stand where another human, an older man with a long beard and wrinkled face, stood pouring liquid into small wooden cups. Why don't you have a drink? It'll help. Zarek, desperate for relief, threw caution to the wind for the second time that day. The liquid inside the cup was deep green. He hesitated for a moment, Ryan standing there watching him in amusement. Go on, he urged. It's just a drink. You've been through a lot. Zarek, overwhelmed by his thirst, downed the drink in one go. It was unexpectedly smooth, with a sweet aftertaste. He immediately felt a cool sensation spreading through his body, putting him at ease and even relieving his fatigue. Better? Ryan asked, watching him closely. Much better, Zarek admitted. For the first time since landing on this death world of a planet, he felt a small sense of relief. The humans didn't seem hostile toward him, at least not openly. Maybe this mission wouldn't be a complete failure after all. If he could just learn more about them and their city and report back, the Crotans could easily deal with them. Zarek marveled at the human city as they walked further in. It was a miracle how the humans managed to integrate their lives with the ecosystem. Kids ran along the massive trees, chasing small, fierce-looking creatures. Adults were going about their business, using the animals and plants around them like mere tools. Zarek shook his head in disbelief. How do you survive here? The jungle, the animals. They're so hostile. Ryan laughed lightly, as if the question were amusing. Hostile? Not really. Sure, they can be dangerous, but we've learned to work with them. It's how we thrive. The plants, the beasts, we control all of it. You control all of this? Zarek asked, still trying to wrap his head around it. The plants, the beasts, they attacked me. They obey you. Ryan looked at him with a casual smile, his eyes sparkling. Oh, those? We control them, always have. That's how we easily eliminated your team. The words hit Zarek like a physical blow. He stopped in his tracks, staring at him in disbelief. You... what? Ryan turned to face him fully now, his smirk widening into something more sinister. Oh, it seems you're a little slow on the uptake. Let me put it more clearly for your insect brain. Ryan closed the distance between them, putting his face right in front of Zarek's. We killed your team. He relished each word, drawing them out as if savoring the taste. Zarek's heart felt like it was about to stop. How? How could they have known? How could they have possibly tracked his team in the dense jungle, let alone wipe them out? His pulse was getting faster by the second, and suddenly, his limbs felt heavy. His breathing became slow, and his vision blurred at the edges. Panic spread through him. "You're not looking too good, Captain," Ryan said, his tone dripping with mocking concern. He stepped closer, and Zarek tried to move, but his body refused to listen. The realization struck him like lightning. The drink, it was spiked. His legs gave out as he collapsed to the dirt, unable to move. Ryan knelt beside him, whispering in his ear, "Welcome to Earth's real training ground." Two other humans appeared from the shadows, grabbing Zarek's limp body by the arms and dragging him along the ground. He couldn't even muster the strength to resist, his mind spinning with horror at the realization of how easily he had been trapped. His mission had failed before it had even truly begun. Zarek was dragged into a dark chamber, his body strapped to a cold stone chair. He was paralyzed. He couldn't lift a claw. The wall seemed to be made out of connected roots, like the inside of a living tree. The door parted open, and a man entered the room. He was an older man with sharp, piercing eyes. He wore an old uniform, but carried himself in authority. He was clearly not to be taken lightly.
"Dr. Elias Verne," the man introduced himself. "I understand you're one of the Crotan scouts. Welcome to Earth."
Zarek stared at him, his mind still foggy but aware enough to recognize the threat this man posed.
"What do you want?"
He managed to speak out. Dr. Verne smiled faintly.
"What we want is simple. We want the universe to know that Earth is not to be messed with, to ensure that your people understand what you're dealing with."
He motioned to the walls, which seemed to pulse faintly as if the roots themselves were alive.
"You aliens think of us as primitive because we don't rely on technology the way you do. But you've made a grave mistake."
Zarek's eyes looked to the walls.
"What is this planet?"
Dr. Verne came closer to him, his eyes wide with intensity and a nefarious smile on his face.
"This death world is where we live, where we train. You see, while your kind has been building weapons and ships, we've been mastering biology. The plants, the animals, they're not just part of our world. They are our world. And we control them as easily as you control your machines. And we've been waiting a long time for some dumb aliens to come looking for trouble, but you all ignored us. We've become impatient, so we made sure that someone would notice us, sending little faint signals from outside our system till someone took the bait. And now you're finally here."
Zarek's heart raced as Verne's words sank in. It was a trap. The humans wanted the Crotans to come. These humans are insane. They're bloodthirsty. They want war. He struggled to make sense of it. But the more he learned, the more hopeless his situation seemed. Zarek's mind reeled. His mission had failed spectacularly. The humans had been ready for this all along. Dr. Verne leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper.
"You were never going to succeed, Captain. Not here. Not against us."
Zarek felt a wave of despair wash over him. He had to salvage something from this disaster, some piece of information to send back to the Crotans. Grasping at straws, he makes a last-ditch effort to maybe scare the humans.
There are 100,000 soldiers on our ship. When they arrive, you'll be wiped out."
Dr. Verne raised his eyebrow in surprise, but before he could even respond, Ryan, who was standing quietly in the corner, clicked his tongue in disappointment. "Only 100,000? He said with a mocking sigh. "That's not nearly enough." Zarek stared at him, unable to understand the casual way he just dismissed the threat of an entire army. "Not enough to have our fun," Ryan added, his voice filled with malice. Zarek could only look back at him in terror. He knew that it was too late. The Crotan army was going to be massacred. The humans weren't just defending their world, they were predators, and they had been waiting for this moment. Zarek was kept alive, but he quickly realized why. The humans had a hidden purpose for him. a dark, twisted purpose. Ryan stood over him, holding a small, genetically modified snake.
"This,"
he said,
"is our little buddy. It'll make sure you do exactly what we want."
Zarek struggled, but he couldn't move as the snake sank its fangs into his dark skin. The venom ran through his veins. He fought against it, but the control was too strong. In a trance-like state, Zarek was forced to activate his comms, connecting with General Vanacore. Aboard the Corton fleet, "Earth is uncivilized," he reported. "Defenseless. I have sent the coordinates. Launch the invasion." General Vanacore's eyes glared with triumph.
"Excellent. Begin the full-scale ground invasion immediately. Terra will fall."
The Crotan army immediately descended on Earth like a tsunami, their ship breaking through the atmosphere, landing in the dense jungle. Thousands of heavily armed soldiers poured from the transports, their mighty weapons reflecting their technological advancement. The soldiers advanced deeper into the jungle, confident in their own strength, not knowing what was about to go down. The jungle was silent at first, but very quickly, the jungle came alive. The trees shifted and the branches cracked and groaned. Massive roots burst from the dirt, crushing soldiers. Before the Crotans could even react, thick vines laced with venom shot from the trees, wrapping around the soldiers and crashing them against each other. The chaos was just starting. Deep from the forest, massive bioengineered animals charged into battle, humans riding on top of them. Bears with genetically enhanced muscles and armored hides clawed their way through the Crotan ranks. The humans mounted their weapons on top of the beasts, heavy machine guns and grenade launchers that unleashed hell on the alien forces. A Crotan soldier barely raised his weapon before a giant rhino impaled him and two others, tossing them away like rag dolls.
What is this? This isn't a planet! This is a nightmare!
Screamed one Crotan soldier, his red eyes wide with terror. The humans had complete control over their death world. Giant sunflowers, positioned throughout the jungle, started flaring up, revealing blazing cones of energy. Humans mounted the giant flowers and used them to vaporize entire battalions in seconds, turning flesh and bones into ash. The Crotans were simply outmatched and taken by complete surprise by the biological assault of the humans. Panic spread as their ranks broke and formations started to retreat. A Crotan commander shouted orders in an effort to regroup the forces, but his words were cut short as a human impaled his chest with his bare hands. The Crotans were thrown into complete disarray. General Vanacore stood in shock in the middle of the carnage, his eyes filled with disbelief and despair. His once invincible army was now reduced to nothing more than a pile of massacred bodies, their advanced technologies rendered useless against the Death Worlders. The jungle was now quiet as if to mock him, the ground still soaking with blood. "How?" Vanacore whispered to himself, his voice trembling. How did this happen? Earth was supposed to be a primitive world, but it had turned into a death trap far beyond anything he had imagined. He had failed, and now there was only one option left: escape. The general turned tail and ran towards his dropship. If he could just get back to the ship, he could regroup, he could... Before even finishing his thought, a vine shot out from the shadows, latching onto his feet. The general screamed, his claws digging into the dirt as he was dragged back. Through the thick vegetation, Sergeant Ryan Carter stepped into view. His expression was calm and casual as always. Behind him, his squad moved silently, their eyes fixed on their prey.
"Leaving so soon?"
Ryan asked, tilting his head mockingly.
"I thought you wanted to stick around for the grand finale."
Vanacore groaned, his words caught in his throat as the vines tightened, holding him in place. There was no escaping this. He was at their mercy. Ryan crouched in front of him, his eyes staring at him menacingly.
"I want to show you something,"
he said, his voice almost conversational.
"An ancient weapon. Simple, but effective."
He reached into a holster at his side and pulled out a small metal object. It was crude by Crotan standards, nothing more than a lump of steel with a barrel and a trigger. Vanacore stared at it with a confused look. This was a weapon? It was archaic, and yet The way Ryan held it made it seem more dangerous than a blaster.
"This here," Ryan said, holding the revolver to his head, "is a gun. Let me show you how it works."
Vanakor's eyes trembled as the cold barrel pressed against his head. There was a click, followed by a deafening bang. His body collapsed, lifeless, as his brains splattered across the fertile soil. Ryan smirked, wiping the gun on his sleeve.
"Guess guns work pretty well on the poor bastards,"
he said jokingly, glancing back at his squad. His soldiers giggled in twisted amusement as they dragged Vanakor's body into the jungle. Zarek Talus, now barely conscious, was dragged by the humans through the merciless jungle. His body was heavy with defeat. The sound of silence was deafening. The humans dragged him into a large clearing. The sight he witnessed turned his stomach. Corpses, thousands of them, 100,000 to be exact, all laid out in neat rows. His comrades' lives reduced to piles of fertilizer. Zarek's mind reeled as he fell into crushing despair. The Crotan Empire sent an advanced army, and Earth had reduced them into pounds of flesh. Ryan Carter stood beside him. With his arms crossed, he spoke calmly, his voice like cold icicle stabbing through Zarek's ears.
"This here?"
He gestured to the rows of bodies with a casual wave of his hand.
"This is what's left of your invasion force. 100,000 soldiers. 100,000 soldiers. Gone in a matter of hours."
Zarek's body shook uncontrollably. The weight of his massive failure came crashing down on him. All he could do was stare at the empty husks of his kin, regretting every life choice that led him to this death world.
Just kill me,
Zarek whispered, his voice barely making a sound. But Ryan wasn't done with him yet. He grabbed Zarek's mandibles, forcing him to look into his eyes.
"No,"
he said softly, almost gently.
"We've got other plans for you."
Ryan took out a knife, cutting Zarek's restraints. His arms just limped to the ground next to him. Ryan pointed toward a small ship at the edge of the clearing.
"You're going to be a good little boy. You're going to get in that ship,"
he said as his tone shifted to a more devilish one.
"And you're going to go back to your cute little planet and tell your leaders what happened here. You'll also tell them,"
he said, his twisted smirk returning to his face,
"we're still waiting."
Zarek slowly got up on his feet, his body trembling with despair as he took a look at the bodies of his comrades, then another at Ryan's cold, traumatizing face. Without a word, he dragged his feet towards the ship, his mind and body numb in horror. The humans watched in silence as the doors closed behind him and the engines ablaze. Zarek's ship took off into the serene blue sky, leaving behind the nightmare called Earth. His hands trembled as he activated the ship's communicator, his voice hollow as he sent a message back to his home.
Earth is a death planet. No one should ever step foot there.